Call to order the Lakewood City Council study session in the city of Lakewood, Colorado on May 6th, 2019 at 7 p.m. in council chambers. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Hall.
Here.
Roybal.
Here.
Gutwein.
Here.
Skilling. Labuer. Here. Abel.
Here.
Vincent.
Here.
Vita.
Here.
Johnson.
Here.
Frank. Here. Harrison.
Here.
You have a quorum.
So forgive me, I said 7 at 7:35, but you all know that, and I do want to apologize. As many of you may know, if you do follow Lakewood City Council, we have a lot of meetings. And in fact, we had a special meeting Thursday night, and we had a special meeting prior to tonight, and we'll have a special meeting prior to tomorrow or next week's Monday night. So with that said, on behalf of the body, we do apologize. This one did run late. It was a 2-hour meeting. So thank you for your patience. We know that you have a lot of important things going on, so we'll try to be brief and get right to it so we can hear from the community. So with that, we'll begin our first topic, which is a discussion on short-term rentals, and I'm going to turn that over to Councilor Franks, as this is a follow-up.
Thanks, Mayor Paul. Basically wanted to kind of explain why it got turned over to me. During the meeting in which we were discussing it previously, there was enough concern that I had asked for this to be kind of tabled and kind of come back with more information for this kind of discussion or study session. And so I first wanted to thank Margie Greer for all the work she did to take my very, very long list of questions and information and formulate it into the packet that was published on the website. Did want to take a couple opportunities to talk through a couple things in the packet. If you're looking at the packet, there was a section on discussion points, and it was number F, so 1F. And basically it read, is it correct, this is the question that I wrote, is it correct to state that code enforcement current and historically has taken no proactive action against illegal listings on sites like Airbnb and VBRO? And in the packet, there was just a miscommunication, and it said that that was not correct. But it actually turns out it is correct. We are not doing proactive enforcement on that at this point. So F is actually just the opposite answer on that, and that was just a basic oversight. The other thing that I wanted to point out is when you're looking at, for council mainly, when you're looking at like section B where it talks about the types of rentals, on the document I submitted, I had qualified that and said that basically that was just two definitions that I found online. That does not mean that's our definitions. Those are just two definitions to kind of talk about maybe differences between an entire home being rented kind of as a short-term rental or home sharing. So those are one thing I wanted to point out there. And then the rest of the information is just literally ideas, talking points. So this is not what anybody has proposed. It's not, it's really just a whole collection of information, really to spur good dialogue, question asking, and that type of thing. So hopefully you all, if you look through that, you had an opportunity to ask staff any questions that you might have. There was also a whole list of kind of websites. I mean, this is obviously a burgeoning area, and so I just provided a ton of reference materials as well. And really, before we sort of kick off the discussion, I really wanted to talk through that there's kind of 4 distinctly different ways that we could choose to go forward tonight, and thought it might make sense to really tee that up first. That way we could see if there was general consensus around one of them, where we may be able to get to an answer sooner rather than later on this very important topic. So the first one is that we could just stay with the status quo. And what that is right now is it's a complaint-driven system. So if somebody feels that a short-term rental is going on next to them, they basically put in a complaint, and code enforcement goes out and is kind of caught in somewhat of a gray area in which we have a ability for a special use for a bed and breakfast if you're in a certain, like R19 or greater. And so code enforcement is kind of left to say, well, you're not in compliance and there's this other thing you can get. But the other thing that they can apply for is a major business, which comes with a whole host of a higher bar. And so the citizens kind of left unsatisfied because they probably can't get that bar met, and code enforcement's kind of left in this gray area. So in my view, status quo probably isn't a great place to leave this, but it is certainly one of the options. Another option is that council could decide that they want to, as a body, add language to prohibit short-term rentals. That's a direction we could go. And you could either do the adding language to prohibit it and not actively enforce it, or you could come up with an active enforcement component. So that's kind of 2A and 2B, where you prohibit it, but you're still leaving it to a complaint-driven system, but yet there's more a surety of how code enforcement can handle this. Or the other one is you're proactively enforcing it and you're looking for not only violations locally, but you're looking on the Airbnb and the VBRO. So that's kind of the second 2A and 2B. Another one is that we could continue to monitor the situation for a definitive short term, 6 months or a year, to understand how destination cities handle it differently than suburbs do, because there's a real difference between how destination places are handling it and how suburbs are handling it. And so we could continue. That's another one. It sort of leans into the status quo, sort of leaves code enforcement and our citizens with less closure on the matter, but it is another way forward. And then the last one is we could decide as a body that, no, we want to go for it. We want to license it. We want to put constructs around the licensing, fees, enforcement, mediation plans, penalties, and the whole kind of the whole suite that has to go with that, staffing that would need to take place. And, there's a whole component with that. And that's why I wanted to kind of give you those 4 directions, because certainly each one of them takes quite a bit of effort to go down those paths. And I know a lot of you have talked to your constituents and you have some ideas. So I wanted to lay those out as well. And then I had one other piece to sort of tee up. Let me find my right document here. Got way too much paperwork for my own good tonight. And the other offshoot of this, and it's not really appropriate for tonight's discussion, but as people in my community have started to think about the impact of this and their thoughts on it, I've been starting to get questions about, well, if council allows citizens to basically monetize their home by way of lodging, then I've had outreach from hairdressers saying, well, can I set up a shop, and can I rent out rooms to other folks to do hair? Mechanics who say, can I then, my 3-car garage, can I use 2 bays of it to conduct service? So I just wanted council to be aware that the dialogue has been opened up, that if we go down the path of allowing people to monetize it for one purpose, we likely are going to have it opened up for others wanting to monetize their residences in different ways. And it's just something I wanted y'all to be aware of, that those have come in. And that is the end of my teeing it up.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Franks. Just for clarity, though, monitor, my assumption was that monitor meant continue to hear from the community and potentially bring an ordinance back. Is that not accurate?
Well, yeah, monitor would be that we would consider all data sources. So we would be actively, those of us interested in this topic would be looking to see what other communities are doing, certainly hearing from our residents, but we would come back on either a 6-month or 1 year to revisit it. Sort of like is a status quo with a date certain to revisit the topic. So that is, I apologize, I did not explain that better.
That's okay. So then my question would be, do you want to go through that discussion and for those of you that may be new to city council, so tonight isn't a public hearing per se on the pros and cons of this topic. Study sessions are the opportunity for council to discuss, to learn more, and your opportunity to ask questions about the different things that are presented. This is a little bit different because this is a furtherance of a previous presentation. And so we do have, I don't know, 10 or 11 folks that have signed up in order to speak, and certainly want to be respectful of your time. So keeping that in mind, we could put those 4 options to play, but I really want to keep this towards things that we may have missed in our packet, or things that we can bring, not a, yeah, you should do this, or no, you shouldn't. It's just not the place. This isn't the public hearing for that type of option. If city council were to go forward, we would have a public hearing where we would certainly kind of engage in that. Does that make sense to council? We clear on that? So do we want to go forth, or does council want to weigh in on these 4 recommendations prior? Councilor Vincent?
I would like to monitor the short term but I want a date certain on that so it doesn't keep going on. I think from what I've been able to read is there could be a difference between destination and suburbs, and I don't personally have enough information on that to make a decision about, yes, we license them, or no, we don't. So that would be my input into it.
Thank you. Is there any other discussion from the body? Ms. Johnson?
Thank you. Do we have the option of listening to public comment beforehand, since folks have been waiting a while?
Oh, you bet.
Yeah.
I just want to be clear. I mean, it's not a public hearing, though.
I know.
Right? So we'd like to add more to have you add more to the conversation, not just do it or don't do it, right? You're part of the study session, and I want to make sure that we delineate, because our regular meetings are for that regular type of public comment. And so I want to emphasize that. Ms. Gutwein, Ms. Franks?
I can wait until after the.
All right.
Yeah, and I want to say, definitely want to hear from folks, but it's also a matter of us deciding if we want to move anything forward, including, in enforcement or any of those things. Those all are going to require a different amount of effort. So it is important, if we're going to give any direction to Ms. Hodgson tonight, that we kind of have an idea of a direction we want to go, because again, they're very different. So you can't really explore all of them. It's really, that's kind of where I was thinking, laying that foundation was, where generally do we want to go? And then we can give staff better direction. But I do want to hear from the community, absolutely.
I guess I do have one thing before. I'm sorry. I think that I just want to echo what Councilor Franks said, that as we've gotten into this, it has proven to be much more complex, I think, than we originally understood. And that leaving it as the status quo may not have the consequence, the effect that people are thinking. So if we leave it as status quo, that means that there is no enforcement, and so they could exist until there's someone saying, you have to stop doing this. And I think that people aren't necessarily understanding that. So I just want to ensure that that's clear. And I think that I would personally like to continue to have more time to engage with our Ward 5 community. So thanks.
Mr. Skilling?
To that point, one question that's coming up is, what would the enforcement be? My understanding is it is complaint driven, but if my neighbor is operating one of these, then and I call and there's a case opened, that the city will act on that. It's not as if the status quo just means, I think, but if I'm missing something, then that's the point of the study session. I would point out that places, and I know that they're destinations, some of them are destination, whether it's San Diego or Vegas, but LA is not. And LA adopted pretty recently a pretty robust plan. It may be worth doing a monitor, do the 6 month or year to see how those work. They're going to be tweaking, they're going to be monitoring what they've already adopted. They were responding to some pretty, is my understanding, and obviously I don't live there, but they were responding to some fairly immediate, widespread, pertinent issues that aren't necessarily, we're not getting inundated with those issues as of now. So maybe that's a reason to do the monitor, let them go through the growing pains.
Ms. Harrison, then Ms. Franks.
Thank you. The only thing that I would want us, if we choose to monitor this for a while, the only thing I'm hoping that we will review code enforcement's possibilities during this monitor time, because I know we've had summer's coming. And I know last summer in Ward 5, we had a couple of short-term rentals that turned into spring break houses. I'll just describe them that way. And the neighborhood was not happy. So I think the only thing that I would want us to really firm up is just exactly how code enforcement can go in when it's complaint-driven and what would happen. Thank you.
Thank you. So I have Ms. Franks again, Ms. Johnson, Mr. Abel.
And so to speak to Councillor Skilling, yes, even though complaint driven, once the complaint is in place, and that is part of the answer structure here, that we had 62 complaints, you know, we're getting good compliance. And so it's part of an education process. But we also have to understand on the flip side of that, there are folks who are reaching out to city staff trying to understand, because maybe they're wanting to make an investment. Maybe they're wanting to buy a house that is larger than maybe their immediate family needs because they're looking for an income stream. So us kicking the can too far down the road also becomes a concern. And so I think it's fair to, I certainly want more information and be able to monitor those, because Denver just revised theirs. If you start looking at cities, you're seeing that most of them, if they've had it for more than a year, are already in a revision state. And so there's a lot of good things to be learned, but at some point we really need to give people in the community an assurance that you know we're going direction A or direction B, and if we're going towards prohibiting and enforcement, what does that look like? Because you have large companies like your Airbnb and VBRO who maybe aren't participating at the level that municipalities would like, so enforcement becomes more challenging. So those are all things, but I lean more into the continue to monitor, but we do need something more timely.
Mr. Abel and Ms. Johnson, and then let's get to public comment.
It seems to me under this current method of enforcement that folks who operate these businesses now are kind of at the whim of their neighbors. If their neighbor is okay with it, then fine, they can operate. If the neighbor doesn't know about it, okay, they can operate. But if one neighbor gets upset, then the operator faces a challenge other operators don't. It would seem to me that that's not fair-handed. I do think that if breaches of the peace occur, then those should probably be handled by enforcement now. But I just hate leaving it out there that if you're doing this and you're doing it responsibly, it depends on how your neighbor might feel. On the other hand, there are some neighbors who are concerned about what's going on next door, and some of them have been inconvenienced or disturbed in the middle of the night. So I just think that we need to either enforce it proactively or discourage official action on complaints until we have something more solid. It's just not fair to have people operating on I don't know how this is going to, what the consequences might be kind of situation.
Okay, so let's go to the public part. So we'll have 3. Okay, your light's not on, so yeah, you turned it off. Ms. Johnson?
I would just like to say in the meantime as well, CML has quite a bit of information on short-term rentals with many things that cities need to be looking at. I've actually spent the last 2 days reading all of this. I apologize. I assumed everybody had that same information, but it's rich. It gives us an idea. It talks about Durango, Breckenridge, Denver, and you kind of get an idea of the difference of cities as a destination city versus a suburb. And also just a question, I've never understood how when we as a city have known for years that these are there, and we haven't been proactive. We've kind of turned our face, which has kind of added to the frustration, I think.
Okay, so I'm just going to address that real quick because I think we have addressed that in the last couple meetings. We don't know who's doing this. We can kind of get an idea, but the maps don't show and they don't indicate who's doing this. So whenever possible, we absolutely have responded, but there's not a database out there that's available to us to say, oh, at 1837 South Cole Court, it's my address, there's one operating. So then there's not one operating at my house. However, it's just not there. So I want to be clear. It's not a pick and choose
May I respond?
operation.
I have the document that the city gave us, and in there it talked about the Airbnb platform, and we have been aware, and you can go and find out exactly where the address is. So
Okay.
I'm just telling you.
I don't. Okay, so 3 minutes for your time tonight. 2.5, this little box is going to go yellow. I ask that, we don't repeat, that you participate in the conversation, and I'll call 4 names at a time, and you guys, just so you know who's ready. So it looks like Shara, and then Shirley, and Catherine Flynn, and then Nancy. Is this Shara Guy here? Shanna, sorry.
The pen wasn't working. Am I supposed to come up here? Yes. Okay, thank you.
Good evening, welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Shanna Guy. Last name is spelled G-U-Y. We live at 55 Yarrow Street in Lakewood, Colorado. We have lived and worked in this community for over 45 years, continually supporting and contributing to it. We have owned rental properties in the area and currently own our own residence. We choose not to live in a covenant-controlled area, and there are many such communities in the city of Lakewood that should be allowed to make the rules that suit their needs and their wants. Over the past couple of years, we personally have stayed in 8 different non-owner occupied short-term rentals while on vacation. Some of our trips were sightseeing trips and some were to visit friends and family. Every one of them was an exceptional experience where we met welcoming hosts and neighbors and frequented local businesses. Back at home, we have endured years of anguish from the house across the street and its long-term resident. People coming all hours of the day and night, parking everywhere, noise, disturbances, police activity, and more. Our neighborhood was even on lockdown once for 5 hours due to SWAT activity over there. There were 35 calls to this specific address in a 4-month period that your city responded to, yet you couldn't put an end to it. So I ask, where are the figures for the complaints regarding long-term residents as a comparison? No one should be expected to live with poorly run residents of any kind, and banning short-term rentals would end a potential tax revenue stream, creating more of an enforcement nightmare with no funding source. The vast majority of short-term rental owners are people like us who are mindful of our investments and our responsibilities. 79% of travelers want to explore a specific neighborhood, and 91% of them want to live like a local. Airbnb guests spend and stay 2.1 times more than the typical visitor, and 42% of their spending is in the neighborhood where they stayed. Public property is publicly owned. Access and use are managed and controlled by a government agency. Common property is owned by a group of individuals and controlled by the joint owners. Private property is that which access, use, exclusion, and management are controlled by the private owner or a group of legal owners. Property rights are an attribute of an economic good, and I should have the right to use the good, the right to earn income from the good, the right to transfer the good, and the right to enforce my property rights. With advances in the marketplace, regulators should be wary of incumbents promoting unfounded criticisms that do not square with the real-life experience of millions of consumers and community members.
Hi.
Please responsibly unlock the opportunities of home sharing for your residents, benefiting families and their budgets.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Are we having technical difficulties? Okay.
There we go.
You were just a couple seconds over, no worries. Shirley, come on down. Then I have Catherine, Nancy, and I can't read the name, but it's 70 Yarrow, so it must be your neighbor. Welcome. Good evening.
My name is Shirley Seitz. I live at 2032 South Gray Drive, Lakewood Estates, Filing 1. I live across the street from a short-term rental. This address was previously turned into the city as a violation of STR regulations, and the city informed us that the STR was allowed at this home. This is inaccurate. According to current Lakewood zoning code, which states R16 does not allow STRs. Filing 1 is an R16. To the subject of violation of existing laws, federal law prohibits parking in front of mailboxes. Renters are not given parking instructions. Consequently, renters consistently park in front of all mailboxes. An addition should be made to our current ordinance to the effect that this has to change. The city has done nothing with regard to enforcement of their own, which does not inspire trust in the citizenry. There is an element of churning in all STR addresses, without a limit on the number of days for rental, no ID required for the renter's car, and the increased traffic as different cars come and go. This affects our neighborhood watch programs, because a renter's car may be reported to the police as a strange vehicle in our neighborhood. Currently, STR owners are not required to tell the renter where to park, and therefore renters park anywhere and everywhere except in the driveway of the owner or on their property. Parking is a huge problem in my area because of the Sun Point parking situation, which has been brought to the council's attention in the past. Without enforcement by the city code, tension is created in our neighborhoods, which I'm sure exists in all Lakewood neighborhoods if they deal with STRs. And it does not foster a cohesive community, which is one of your stated goals. By allowing STR owners to flaunt laws and regulations and offer little or no enforcement, the city is complicit in law breaking. As near as I can tell, there is little or no teeth to the penalties for breaking the rules, because there doesn't appear to be sufficient fines, revocation of permit, if indeed there is one, procedures, or any meaningful penalties to enforce compliance. I urge the council to address these issues and require strict enforcement of all laws, and to vote no on short-term rentals when the opportunity presents itself. Thank you.
Thank you. Catherine, Nancy, and then looks like Ms. Barnett. Good evening, welcome.
Good evening. My name's Catherine Flynn, that's Flynn. I'm at 576 South Field Street, and I guess my concern is mainly for the randomness of who's coming and going in our neighborhoods. And all you have to do is go on Nextdoor and see all the complaints about cars broken into and, just a lot of random sketchy things going on. We live across the street from someone that we know is doing an Airbnb. We haven't reported them. I was actually just waiting to come to this meeting tonight to sort of see what I would learn. I don't like the thought of reporting on neighbors. I want people to live and let live in a way too. But I do have a concern of just knowing who's coming and going. We had a situation last year where someone parked across the street from us, and they were there for like an hour, and they seemed really shady. We finally called the police. When the police showed up, approached the car, and the car took off at a high speed. So, you know, who knows what was going on there, but I just feel like even with our neighbor across the street, you know, the comings and goings, you don't know if that's allowed to be every neighbor that does it. It just concerns me with safety and of the neighborhoods. So thank you.
Great, thank you. Nancy? And then, good evening, welcome. Could you be so kind and pull the microphone when you speak to closer?
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
My name is Nancy Burrows, Burrows, and I live at 564 South Field Street. And I have a real concern with, I have an incident and we reported it, and the code people did come out and deal with a neighbor. But what really prompted the call was the fact that one of these people that were staying at the Airbnb, I looked out my window and he's changing his clothes out of his trunk in my driveway. It's like, excuse me? And I asked the neighbors about it, and they said, oh, well, we vet everybody that we rent to. And I just think, okay, I think that the rules need to be explicit, and everybody needs to know that this is going to be legal or it's not going to be legal. That we need to be clear on, because now my neighbors don't like me, and I don't like that situation. I've been in my house for over 35 years, but it was just because of this situation. But here's a man changing his clothes out of his trunk right in my driveway. Not in the Airbnb's driveway, but in my driveway. So anyhow, just keep all these situations in mind whenever you're discussing how to proceed with this issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And then Miss Barnett? What's your first name? Michelle. Oh, there we go, Michelle. And then I have Mike Gibbons and Jim Alger and Mark Wesley. Welcome.
So I'm Michelle Barnett from 70 Yarrow Street here in Lakewood. And I want to say that I'm glad I stumbled upon this study session to have the opportunity to express my support for short-term rentals. Like many vacationers, I've stayed in well-cared-for short-term rentals, giving me and my family the opportunity to meet people and have experiences we would have otherwise missed by staying in a hotel district. For the record, I am personally in favor of short-term rentals, specifically entire residences that are non-owner occupied. For example, if I choose to buy the house next door, I want to have every option available to make that purchase a success. So I urge the City Council and citizens to consider the big picture. Change is uncomfortable, but Lakewood will lag behind if it continues to remain stagnant or fight against progress. Our city is losing out on tourism revenue now that short-term rentals can bring. I live near Belmar, where retail stores and restaurants are constantly struggling and going out of business. I've read through the documents provided by the city for this meeting, and in my opinion, the public outreach for this topic borders on negligence. Apparently, the city put a survey on its website for this topic, and 2 study sessions have been held. When? I do not know. What I do know is this meeting was not advertised on the Nextdoor app, not advertised in the Lakewood Sentinel, nor was it included in the city informational USPS mailer. So I surmise the City Council thinks it's best to make decisions without public input. And I don't make that claim blindly. I recently attended a Ward 1 meeting where City Council member Charlie Abel specifically told constituents, I'm here to represent you. But then at the end of that same meeting, when asked, where do you stand on the issue of short-term rentals? Charlie Abel immediately responded without hesitation, it won't get my vote. And And later on in that meeting, Ramey Johnson circled back to the topic to secure her unsupportive stance by ignorantly exclaiming, "I don't know why anyone would be in favor of constantly relocating the contents of their underwear drawer." So I urge the public and the city to educate themselves on this topic so that any action taken is in the best interest of the whole Lakewood community. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Gibbons, Mr. Alger, Mr. Wesley, Mr. Dalton, Ms. Yates. Good evening. Welcome.
Well, I feel like I should be welcome. However, I just wanted to pass some items here to you. As a mayor of Lakewood, I don't know where in the world you were, what you were thinking about, what your thoughts, so forth were. I tried to call you probably a half a dozen times. No response whatsoever. I've been responsible, I want you to know, for hundreds of people under my command. I'm retired military. I just cannot figure out why in the world the mayor would not return a call. And it's reference to 8160 West 6th Place. I cannot understand why it took so long to get nothing accomplished in your administration. You can rest assured I would not vote for you as a mayor again. However, I live in a residential area, been living there for 50 years, moved here in 1969. And I noticed in your article that they wanted to call Lakewood Jefferson. Do you remember that?
Jefferson City, yes, sir.
But the point of it is, I live in a property, I've lived there since 1969. I pay my taxes every year. But I feel that nobody is really helping anybody to become successful. My property is depreciating in value. Why? Because the city of Lakewood, you probably are well aware of it. The property is just depreciating. If I were to sell that house today, I'd get probably considerably less. I have one of the nicest properties in the area. And I just cannot understand why you would let them develop or change it into an apartment complex. Cars come in and go, leave. And some of them stay there for a day, some of them stay for 2 weeks, some of them, I've hardly seen anybody stay longer than 2 weeks. But something's wrong, and we need to correct it. We need your help in doing so.
Thank you.
Do you get my message?
Loud and clear.
You understand what I'm saying?
Crystal clear, sir. I'll address it after public comment. Thank you.
But I'm still wondering why the mayor of Lakewood would not return my calls.
I'm wondering too, because I return all my calls. So we'll take a look while we have some other folks speak, and we'll circle back.
And I might add that I visited code enforcement. I visited the office here where they give permits to do building changes.
So, sir, your time's expired. So I appreciate you taking the time, and I will certainly circle back here after public comment, all right? Mr. Alger? Oh, I'm sorry. No, I was searching. So you are Mr.
Michael Gibbons, Gibbons.
Okay.
11725 West Pleasant Avenue, Lakewood, Colorado.
Welcome.
And I've been here, basically grown up here most of my life. I've been in the current residence for 15 years. I personally heard about this in the news. I don't know where everybody else was, but I've heard about the meeting in the news and figured I'd come down here. I talked to my district, Ward 1 people. They returned my phone calls. I appreciated that. They asked me to come down here and make a few points about the door-to-door salesmen. They previously used motels, even the prostitutes used the motel rooms and stuff like that for different activities. and now they go to the Airbnbs. And this kind of screws law enforcement because basically they can't go to the motel rooms and say, hey, you know, we've got some break-in and enterings. These salesmen have been going around and, you know, tasting out the joints and stuff. And so the police can't go to the motel rooms and check out this criminal activity because it's dispersed in your neighborhoods. Okay, so that we have this problem, and we have constant problem with commercial companies coming in with oversized vehicles and trailers, and they're having problems parking at the motels because they don't want all their parking lots taken up by this huge equipment. So now they're in the residential areas of the Airbnbs. And also, there seems to be, I would say, some criminal activity of illegally transporting vehicles because at the Airbnb next door to me, they're loading and hauling vehicles out at 1 o'clock in the morning. Okay, when you're operating at 1 o'clock in the morning, that's not legal, okay? I suspect that they're loading vehicles and hauling them down to Mexico. That's where most of this stuff ends up, especially construction equipment, because that's the field I'm in. I've also noticed a lot of illegal aliens what appear to be renting next door, several families often, and you know, you're losing basically a lot of revenue by having 2-3 families in these rentals with 10 kids, and you know, it's just it's crazy. And then people all understand that experienced drug runners are avoiding public places in favor of the, basically safe houses. Well, because you had to avoid motels because, you know, cops run through your parking lots and they smell pot and they get you. So you start using safe houses. Well, even the young and dumb smugglers now are just like, oh yeah, I can just get an Airbnb. There's an attached garage where I can park my vehicle where the drugs are, and I'm safe to sleep while I rest up for the next part of my journey. So I'm seeing this going on also. Motel experiences. I've actually have one in my local area. I've walked my dog by it for about 10 years. I had all sorts of crazy things asked me, whether it be, trying to get money, guns, drugs. I even had a guy ask me if I'd come in and fuck his wife while I watched. I mean, it's crazy stuff going on in this place.
Alrighty, sir.
You know?
All right, your time is up, and we're gonna try to keep decorum, please. So.
Yeah, I figured that would be.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good luck with these. I think it should be banned in favor of commercial zoning. Keep these things out of the neighborhood.
So your time's up, sir. Thank you very much. Okay. Have a good evening. Mr. Wesley, good evening. Welcome.
Mark Wesley, 576 South Field Street. We moved to the neighborhood because it was a very quiet neighborhood. Now we have an Airbnb across the street, and it's totally changed the complexity of the neighborhood. You know, we kind of had an informal neighborhood watch, communicating with our neighbors. Now we have people coming, wheeling suitcases, walking up the street, you know, cars coming and going. I definitely want it banned. You know, I could tell when you were informally talking about it, you have not experienced it because it does change the complexity of your neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Dalton, then Ms. Yates. And I will just remind folks, if we can kind of keep the foul language out, that'd be much appreciated. Some children do watch, probably very few. Good evening. Welcome.
Good evening, Mayor, Council. I don't have a speech prepared. I actually just learned about this meeting earlier this evening, but thank you for having me here, and thanks for considering this.
I'm sorry, they're having a hard time hearing. You can pull it. Should be able to. You can pull. There we go. Thank you.
How's that? As I was saying, thank you for considering bringing these short-term rentals to Lakewood, or at least clearing up the gray area. I didn't have a speech prepared, and just my 2 cents on the matter is that I am in favor of it. I know Mayor Paul stated to kind of stay away from that. I'll just throw in another couple items. We do stay in VRBOs and Airbnbs when we travel different places, and you really get to experience the local atmosphere of wherever you're staying. I find it highly beneficial. One of the reasons that we did purchase the property that we did is it has 2 separate driveways. It has 2 entrances where the house can be completely separated, top and bottom, so where you can have a guest come in as we're upstairs. Somebody can be in the basement. I think a lot of the things addressed by some of the other residents here can be addressed and written, codified into some sort of regulation. A lot of the problems that we're hearing about may possibly clear up as long as we reduce the gray area and put some actual teeth into the codes. I would like you to keep it open for consideration, at least a yay or a nay. The gray area is kind of difficult for us, at least. We haven't moved forward with the VRBO because of the gray area. But like I said, I'm in favor of it, and thank you again for considering.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Sharon, come on down. Then I have Kate and Marlene, and then Lori. Hi.
Hello. I'm Shauna Yates. I live at 810 South Klein Way. I do own a home. I bought a home that was bigger than I needed. So anyway, I would like to, first of all, make a point on the council questioning the difference between destination cities and suburbs. Please keep in mind, Lakewood is considerably closer to a major worldwide destination, which is Red Rocks. Many, many people want to stay in the community closer to Red Rocks. So I learned on the Lakewood Economic Development page that over a quarter of registered Lakewood businesses are home-based. It goes on to state that Lakewood works hard to ensure our zoning codes support this huge segment of our population. But somehow Lakewood is seemingly not supporting this home-based business. The financial benefits to our community allowing STRs are extensive. Homes who host must create beautiful, accommodating, safe spaces for guests. Local contractors, landscapers, painters, plumbers, flooring, and window companies will also benefit. Not to mention local cleaning companies who will clean these STRs while many hosts would be working. Many neighborhoods have tri-levels and big basements in Lakewood, which is perfect for creating a separate locked STR rental space from the main part of the house. Anyone wishing to do this will also have to invest in egress windows, which cost anywhere from $5,000 to $7,500 per window. Egress windows, in addition to remodeling, designing, and furnishing a beautiful competitive space that will draw guests, can easily get into the tens of thousands. Anyone willing to invest in with this kind of money will have substantial skin in the game. Hosts will want to protect their license by following regulations and maintaining a beautiful property that can continue bringing them valued income. I have never heard of anyone mistakenly trying to get into the wrong home with STRs, except from a few Lakewood residents who oppose them. But if that has happened, it should be addressed. A requirement to have your house number painted on the curb in front of your house, or a requirement that your house number have a light on it at all hours would eliminate this problem. Many who have never frequented or hosted an STR imagine crime would be an unwanted result. I wanted to research this, and I was surprised with what I found. A study done by the University of Massachusetts Amherst in 2017 does correlate an increase of crime to the guests, mostly robbery, not the hosts or the neighborhoods. Home prices are rising exponentially. Everyday life circumstances, such as people on fixed incomes, divorce, deaths of partners, births of children, or single parents who don't have a supportive co-parent can make survival in an expensive area even more difficult. Lakewood residents who bought homes without an HOA should have the right to utilize the unused space in their homes.
Thank you. Kate? Good evening, welcome. You can. You bet.
Hi, I'm David Martin.
I'm Kate Martin.
So we've lived in Lakewood for a couple of years now, and we've lived in Lakewood a couple of years now, and we've experienced Airbnbs throughout our neighborhood. And I'm really sorry for all these other people that have had bad experience, but we've had nothing really but good experience. We don't have an Airbnb, but people that live up and down our street that we noticed have people coming and going, and we've had nothing but good experiences. So I'm really sorry for those people that had bad experiences.
My short story, I didn't know Airbnb was happening, and then my husband's really into security. Not that we need it in our neighborhood because all of our neighbors are super nice. But this guy was at my door and I was like, what is he doing with a bunch of zip ties at my door? And then he rang the doorbell, so I answered. And our neighbors across the street are a bunch of teenagers / younger adults that have cars that are questionable. But they're great neighbors, by the way. They're great. But one of their bumpers was falling off. And it was an Airbnb guy from up the road that came with zip ties. Was like, hey, we want to zip tie your bumper. And I'm like, that's not even my car, it's my neighbor's. So then we went over to my neighbor's house and they said, thank you so much. And he zip tied their car for them, and a nice Airbnb guy. But our neighborhood's all about helping each other out. And I thought he was just a neighbor that we hadn't met, but he was an Airbnb guy. So we are in favor of Airbnb. They have had great experiences. That's it.
Thank you. I think we should hand out awards at public comment. You would get one tonight. Marlene, is that right? Feinholtz? Yeah, good evening, welcome. And then I have Lori Graves.
Marlene Feinholtz.
Yes.
I was invited to come by someone who lives in Lakewood, who is my daughter, and I live in Denver. And I just had a real quick story about the fact that my husband and I are running an Airbnb, and it's an owner-occupied situation. We live on the upper level, and the walkout basement is our Airbnb. And it's been a fabulous experience. We had gone to a few Airbnbs with our family, and that's what encouraged us to do this. And since we opened it up in June of 2017, so we've been doing it almost for 2 years. And my husband and I work together to keep it clean and neat and ready for each guest's arrival. Our guests have their own private entrance, so they come and go as they please and have never bothered us. We are just a text away if they need anything. Since we opened, we have had 165 reservations, and we don't accept one-night reservations. It has to be 2 nights or more. So we don't have people just coming, and most of them average 4 nights, which is nice. And the income derived from the business has made it possible for my husband to retire. And to alleviate any fears that you would have too much noise or cars, we live in Berkeley, Regis Berkeley neighborhood near Tennyson. And in all this time, in 2 years, we have never had one neighbor complain, not one person ever knock on our door and complain about our guests. They come in their private entrance. Sometimes they've got a rental car or they've driven here from another state. And also they use Uber and Lyft. And we've never had a parking issue and absolutely no complaints. We also have never had any of our guests be loud or obnoxious, either in our home or in our yard. So it's a lot to be proud of. And the one thing that is nice for our community is they usually ask for recommendations, for restaurants and, for all different kinds of places to go to. And we have a wide variety of brochures and books and all about the hiking in the area. And it's just been a wonderful experience for us, very positive, with no complaints. So I wish you all the best of luck in Lakewood.
Thank you. Lori, and then if you didn't sign up and you'd like to speak, please come down here and see Miss Greer, and I will get you on. Come on down.
Act like a bad penny.
Welcome.
Thank you. Mayor, City Council members. Lori Graves, Lakewood Estates Homeowners Association President. I'm going to run through my stuff really fast. First, I'd like to state that our HOA is not in favor of short-term rentals in any residential zone, and we don't believe the city should disregard the concerns of owners who move to a residential area, a neighborhood, for the peace and quiet that it offers, separate from business activities that churn customers, which short-term rentals do. And we hope the city will be very careful when they make their decision. We do support long-term rentals and roommate-type arrangements that are long-term to help deal with the economic issues of people who want and need the extra money. The position we take on long-term rentals suits our neighborhood in particular because we have a lot of long-term residents, and it incorporates them into our neighborhood, our activities, and gets them involved and gets them knowing everybody. From our perspective, living in a neighborhood long-term, knowing your neighbors and contributing provides a sense of security, makes people feel like they've got a home and a place they can call home. And that gets disrupted when there's a lot of churn and a lot of activity going in and out of the households. So should you decide to proceed and go ahead, study, and then do something, we offer up some basic ordinance requirements. I guess it would be our ordinance ideas, which I've provided the city. I'll go over them real fast. But overall, to make it work and to address the good and the bad sides of short-term rentals, the city and its partners have to have enough funding to do enforcement, licensing, make sure the zoning's done, handle complaint resolution, handle safety issues, and handle taxing rules. And you have to have enough money to pay for the reporting, the auditing, and have enough trained personnel to do the enforcement. So, and in the interim, I'm going to add that clarifying the penalties right now in this gray area, I think would be really critical. We would offer up that you split the look at short-term rentals into the home sharing type and the whole home vacation rental, because we think the criteria are different. The type of zoning might be different, the number of units available, days available for rental, minimum and maximum days of stay, and occupancy limits, I think, are really different whether you're dealing with a whole home or just renting out a room. We think you should only have one license per dwelling unit or accessory dwelling unit, but not both. So it's one per lot.
Your time is...
There's more. I've submitted it. Thank you.
Thank you. And we certainly know that we'll continue to hear from your HOA. We mean that in a good way, so that's great. You are great communicators. All right. Anybody else? Okay. So seeing none, I want to just address a couple things because I want to try to see if we can have a good, quick conversation and get some sort of direction to move forward. To Captain Alger, who spoke, we actually do have a record, and it sounds like our Ward 2 council members have dealt with him extensively, as well as our code enforcement, as well as our community outreach folks. So we have been in contact, and unfortunately, I don't see any record of missed calls from me. So I think he left, but we are continued to be engaged, and our council members will be engaged, as well as our staff. So the shared economy is something of great interest to a lot of people. I myself personally, in my day job, have been greatly affected by the shared economy. I have a transportation company that has fallen prey to Uber and Lyft, so I certainly understand concerns in that regard. And I would say that bad neighbors come in all shapes and sizes, and I think we all have stories about that. So what I'd like to do for me personally, what I think that there's a way we can find a sweet spot to address the concerns and really balance property rights. And that's the key. It's the balance of the rights of those who are here and the rights of people that own and want to do certain things with their house. That's fundamental to our whole country, is the property rights. So I do believe that there needs to be some certainty. If this council's not going to go forth, then we need to figure out what that looks like and be done. But I think we have a lot of information. Lakewood Estates has done a great job, as well as other communities, to help guide, I think, some good principles that might work. And then also, if we can meet with some of the folks who've had bad experiences and better understand what those are coming from, I think that could be helpful. I know one of the communities in the mountains has a 24-hour hotline that the residents can call if there's issues, and that way it's addressed right away. And I know that we've heard that there's been parking issues too. We want to make sure that we're not adding undue burdens with parking. So I would like to see us continue to talk, continue to figure out something to put forth that really does find a sweet spot. And I think that we certainly can get to that. I do have one question, Mr. Graham, and I don't know if you can answer that tonight. But under state law, are HOAs allowed to ban, or do covenants allow for communities to ban? So could their HOA say we don't allow those?
Well, I don't know off the top of my head, but generally speaking, I'm not aware of a state law that would prohibit an HOA from imposing restrictions one way or another. Covenant-controlled communities are really based on a contract, right? And so when you move in, you buy a piece of property, you sign that contract, and you agree to the restrictions and limitations that the HOA has set forth, which can be changed by the HOA. And it depends on the documents that establish the HOA. But you know, so they do tend to have a lot of control, and my guess would be that HOAs could, in fact, ban short-term rentals if they desired to. But once again, off the top of my head.
No, that's fine. I was just curious, because I got some shakes, yes, from our folks at Lakewood, so that's helpful. Mr. Skilling?
So shall we make general comments about what we heard? One of the biggest things that came out of the public comment, and I think we've talked about this before, is the difference between a home-based rental and a non-home-based. Distinct, different things. I mean, we looked at the comparisons with LA City Council and the study that USC had put together, what have you, about affordability and how folks coming in and buying homes for just the purpose of renting them out was jacking up the prices. I could see that as a concern. But then we heard about the folks that have the driveways and you could put it on lockdown. So those are two totally different ideas. I don't think it's we talked about a home-based business, but the difference is in a home-based business, like the homeowner's there, they're operating the business. They don't start a business and then leave for the day and come back 8 hours later. So I think there's a distinction there that we should probably look at. I don't know if that's helpful at all, but I would say that looking at it from a home owned or a homeowner is there. I don't know what's home sharing versus renting out the whole thing and the owners are up skiing or something. And I think those are two different ideas that might bridge the gap between that, because it sounds like the concerns. I mean, if you have a problem with the renters, the short-term renters, you go over and knock on the door and say, hey, Adam, your guys are making a lot of noise, shut them down, right? So maybe there's a difference there.
Do you have a recommendation as to one of the four that was outlined?
Well, I guess I'm concerned, as we heard in public comment, about this kind of gray area and everyone's kind of out there. I certainly don't want people investing egress windows and $5,000, $10,000, whatever it is, or buying a house with an expectation that they're going to rent it out if they can't do that. And if we're being lax in our enforcement, then we're being somewhat implicitly allowing it. So I think if we're going to, I kind of like the monitor idea just to kind of get feedback from some other places. Somebody had mentioned Denver's already done a rewrite. So let's see how that goes. But in the meantime, I think it would be important to maybe think about enforcement, maybe just more education. Because I mean, right now, I don't know if people know, right now you cannot operate a short-term rental in the city of Lakewood. And that doesn't appear to be a well-known fact.
Correct. Councilor Abel.
Thank you. I want to correct one thing. I regret if I left the impression that I said I would vote against this no matter what. There was a gentleman at our meeting 5 weeks ago who had said that every backyard could have a STR ADU and a short-term rental auxiliary dwelling unit in the backyard. The point I wanted to get across is that I will not vote for legislation that would change the character of our neighborhoods. There are a lot of issues here affordability goes both ways. If a couple wants to have an STR operation in their house and helps them afford to live there, that's a good thing. On the other hand, if, as Mr. Skilling pointed out, if people are investing in homes just in order to make them short-term rentals, that changes the character of a neighborhood. It also takes homes off the market, and as he said, increases the price of homes, and that does nothing for affordability either. So we have a lot of conflicting information here that we're going to have to weigh and decide which way to go. I don't think there is a uniform solution out there, and it's certainly not putting one in every household. But the concern about security for the neighbors could be easily handled. Estes Park has a requirement that every STR operator contract with someone who can be on call 24/7. If the police come and there's a disturbance, they have the choice of arresting folks that caused the disturbance or not arresting them. If they don't arrest them, then this would give a mechanism for a 24/7 manager to come and say, sorry, you folks are gonna have to go. Just like a hotel would or a motel would. But I certainly haven't decided that I'm going to rule out any chance of short-term rentals in Lakewood. And all of our meetings are well posted. We have public note meeting requirements that we have to meet just like every other city. We have had, this is our third, I believe, meeting on short-term rentals, study session on short-term rentals. They've all been put on our website. I always feel like there is more we can do to reach out and invite the community to come and tell us what they want and what they would like us to do. Many times we have hours and hours of public comment. So we're certainly not shy about that. But as far as I know, everyone on this panel up here will not make up their mind until they push the button to vote yes or no on the final version that we're presented with. Thank you.
Just to follow up too, do you have any idea which way you'd like to drive this conversation tonight? Status, prohibit, monitor, go forward?
As I said earlier, right now we have a two-level situation. Folks that are operating these things, if their neighbors don't like it, they complain. If the neighbors are ambiguous, they don't complain. And I don't think I don't think we should be putting the people who are now operating these things under that unbalanced situation. I think we should right now just monitor and not charge folks, not go out and issue code violations, but if there is a true breach of the public peace, that's something that requires action. That would require action at an apartment house that has dozens of permanent renters. I also understand that you can have bad neighbors no matter where you live. So I don't think the two-tiered enforcement thing is fair to people who are currently operating these. So I would like to monitor it, but not have any penalties levied until we decide what to do with this.
Ms. Harrison?
Thank you. I'm going to kind of, I hang my hat on property rights, and I can see where short-term rentals are really important for several different classes of people. One would be seniors, helping to support their income a little bit more. Also, single-family moms or dads that single parent trying to handle a kid, that could possibly give them the opportunity to stay home. Other situations where people might be disabled, that might be an additional source of income for them. I really believe those property rights are very important. They bought a house with the ability, if they were another kind of home business, they would be able to do that from that home. So I'm really reluctant to say that we should shut down short-term rentals. I do believe that we need to have some code enforcement involved in the fact of the parking and whatnot, but I'm in favor of doing number 3, continuing to monitor for a certain time frame, but I also would like to make sure that code enforcement calls that do come through either police and or parking or whatever that would be given a high priority, and we need to monitor those so we know where they are, where they're coming from, so we can come back in and see that data at some point in the future. I think that would really help us be able to know what we need to do and how we need to change it. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Beta.
Thank you, Mayor. I think one of the worst things that we can do as a council is to leave something undecided for too long, to not make a decision and not give our community some direction one way or the other. And so I'm really reluctant to say, let's kick the can down the road. Let's see where this thing goes. I think it's time for us to make a decision and start moving in a direction rather than let's wait and see. The information that we have, I think, is the experience from other communities around the country have been less than stellar on these Airbnbs, the short-term rentals, less than stellar. There's a lot of problems that come up with these, and without going into all of them, but there are a lot. And Lakewood is a first and foremost, it's a suburb. That's what it's always been. People buy homes here. In my ward, certainly Ward 3, they've lived in the community for 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years, where some of them have bought these homes when they were first built, and they bought them for a single family residence, free of commercial interference, commercial use. They're looking for a quiet neighborhood to raise their families. If they wanted to buy into a commercial area or a motel area, they would do that. They're there because they see it as a quiet area with certain limited amount of activity. When you introduce the Airbnbs, you're going to change that. That's absolutely going to happen. And when I agree, certainly with some of the other councilors about property rights. Of course, property rights are important, but we've already defined what those property rights are. We defined it a long time ago, and we've been living by what those property rights are. You're allowed to do certain things with your property, and you're not allowed to do other things with your property. So those have been defined. Those are the rules. Those are the law, and now we're being asked to change them because some people have bought in hopes that we're going to change the rules, or in hopes that we're not going to enforce the rules, that we're going to ignore the rules. I'm not in favor of doing that. I'm sorry. I think that we all have to live up to the rules that we've been given. I'm concerned about what would happen if we were to allow Airbnbs in our community, and whereas certain HOAs, I think, have the capability of coming in and banning them. So if you live in an HOA, you can ban them and have that luxury. But if you don't, then and those HOAs tend to be a little higher end neighborhoods. They tend to be, homes that are a little higher end. So in my ward, a lot of the homes are not subject to HOAs. So we would be imposing that ability to have these HOAs, and they would have no recourse like an HOA would. So that's it's a differing. It's almost a discrimination kind of thing where certain neighborhoods are going to be stuck with the Airbnbs if we go into it, whereas others would not. And that troubles me. That really troubles me to have that differing treatment of the neighborhoods. Another thing that concerns me about this idea of Airbnbs is the enforcement. If you're going to allow them, then you're going to have a fairly complex set of rules. There's no way around it. If you're going to make this work, you're going to have a complex set of rules. And once you do that, then you've got to have enforcement. And that's complicated, that's expensive. We're going to have a staff. We're going to have hire people, a whole new department in the city. And that's what you're going to be required to do here. And if we don't do that, then we're lying to the people. We're saying we're going to allow these Airbnbs, and we're going to have these rules, and we're going to enforce them, and everything's going to be wonderful. But if we don't do it, we're lying to you. And I don't want to see that. I think that troubles me. So it puts the city in a position of having to really have to ramp up on this if we're going to seriously enforce Airbnb rules. I'm also concerned, another issue that I think has to be considered is we're going to commercialize our neighborhoods if we allow this. We're going to make them more commercial, and they're going to compete with other businesses in the city of Lakewood. You're naturally going to create some competition. Now, we just passed some very stringent and new rules on motels and hotels in the city of Lakewood just within the last couple of months. Licensing requirements and some very strict requirements. And so are we going to apply those to the Airbnbs too? Or are they going to get a pass? Are they going to get a different set of rules that are going to be more forgiving? And then the question is, well, how is that fair? And if we're going to allow the competition, how can you apply one set of rules to the Airbnbs that are a lot more forgiving and a lot more strict rules to the legitimate businesses who are here and have been operating for a long time? So this is another problem. And if you apply the strict rules to the Airbnbs that you do to the others, how really viable is it going to be? Are you going to be willing to allow the city to come in on a moment's notice for inspections of your home? I mean, this is your home now. So I think that creates some problems. Another issue that I'm concerned about is this idea that, I just lost my thought. But I think there's a lot of problems with these Airbnbs. The other thing is, once you go down that road, you can't bring it back. Once you open that can of worms, you can't come back later and say, oh, okay, well, maybe that wasn't such a good idea, so we're going to do away with them. Now you can't do that because you've got people, like you say, who've invested a lot of money in their property to bring them up to speed, to make them viable for an Airbnb. Now you can't just turn around and say, wow, we changed our mind, it was a bad idea. Well, wait a minute, now all these people have invested money, and now we are talking about some serious property rights that are, we could be infringing on by changing things. So I think going down the road at this time, it's premature. I think my feeling would be that we move towards banning them in Lakewood, and not only banning them, but enforcing them. I think that's an easier type of enforcement. And we know, we can find out who's using them and who's doing it illegally. We ban them and we enforce them. And that way the community knows this is where you stand. If you want to invest in a Airbnb, there's other communities you can do it. Denver, they love them. Other cities, they love them if that's what you want to do, but not in Lakewood. The other thing I wanted to point out too, when you start allowing these Airbnbs, and especially for investors to come in, now you're taking homes off of the market. One of the problems we have in Lakewood is having single-family dwellings available to people, trying to keep those affordable. If you start allowing these things, the prices are going to go up. The values of these homes are going to go up. It's going to be less affordable for our families to come in and buy a single-family owner-occupied home. And Not only that, you're going to be taking them off the market. You're going to be allowing investors, they're going to be taking them off the market. Therefore, you've reduced the supply of single-family homes in the city of Lakewood, which is exactly what you don't want to do. So for all of those reasons, I think we need to make a decision, and I would be in favor of moving towards banning them and enforcing it.
Thank you. Ms. Franks.
Thanks, Mayor Paul. I did want to speak to a couple of the comments. One on community engagement. I think this council has been laser focused on community engagement, and just wanted to kind of talk through a few things. Since we kind of convened a few years ago, we used to get 3 days notice on the meeting packets. We get 10 days notice. The city clerk's office produces an agenda that's really detailed. So the website has a lot of good information. We have Lakewood Speaks, lakewoodtogether.org, Ward 4 newsletter, which Councilor Skilling said might be submitted for a Pulitzer, I'm sure, coming up. It was so amazing this last time. So I did want to make sure, but we always are open to more ideas. The whole point is we are desperately trying to get as much community engagement as we can. And the website right now is under revision. And so there's a link at the top where you can go in, kind of look at how it's evolving. If you've got ideas on how we can better communicate, please feed those in. So again, we absolutely want the highest level of community engagement, and I will put in a request that in the future that we get a little bit more exposure on Nextdoor. I know that's a real popular one as well. Did want to speak about a few other topics. Neighborhood character, that's one where I've heard the most about folks who chose specifically to live in the suburbs, maybe on a cul-de-sac, on a quiet street, picked those for reasons. And so it is just understandable that they're having some concerns about that. Certainly wanted to speak about property rights. I already live under a whole host of zoning rules. I can't have a fence taller than 6 foot. My shed had to be a certain size to not need a permit. I can't put my RV on the street. There's a whole host of things that I'm not allowed to do. And I just wanted to explain to people, if you are thinking of doing some activity and you're not sure whether it's permitted or not, we've got a great customer request system online. Put that question in before you make that investment. Make sure that you know what the code allows, and it does vary based on the size of your property. So if you're in an R16 like I am, there's different rules for that, and as you get larger, different rules apply. So certainly we would not want you to make an investment and not be able to realize value on that, but conversely, the rules are on the books, and that zoning code does control that. So be sure to check into that. I did want to speak to the point of, I don't believe that since we do have a complaint-driven system, I don't think we can put a stay on if somebody calls in to complain. We can't, in my view, start picking and choosing which complaints we enforce. I think that is a dangerous thing to do, because then somebody who says, well, I have a pile of firewood that's too big, and can you just, until you decide whether that's a realistic size, I think we start splitting that. I think we have to enforce the rules that are on the books, and if we need to give staff more clarity and come back and put that in, we certainly need to go that direction. I also do not like the fact that right now we only have a complaint-driven system, which is adversarial, and many people are very uncomfortable with doing that. I get calls all the time saying, hey, so-and-so at this address has an RV park that can you put in the complaint? So it looks like I'm really complaining about everybody. But the truth is we have folks who they don't want to harm the relationship that they have in their neighborhood. And so it's easier just to have me complain about those things. And I certainly will do my job. And if there is something where I can see it's clearly in violation, I will put in that report. But that just shows us that we probably have a lot of people who aren't complaining, and then we also have a lot of people who love the interaction. So we have two sides of that coin. The other thing that I'm going to request that staff do, regardless of how we go forward, is I think we certainly need to understand the commercialization of properties. I think that if we're going to say that one type of commercialization, if we were to eventually go down that path, then what do we say again to the hairdressers, the massage therapist, the mechanic, the personal trainer, other personal services and things where you would have traffic coming and going? That opens up Pandora's box for me. And again, I moved personally into a suburb for that suburb feel. And so I think we need to understand what we may be getting ready to do. While looks like so far people are kind of into the monitor, I'm leading. I certainly can get on board with that if that's the majority, but I also am for more active enforcement. If we're going to have these laws on the books, then we need to give people assurance of what they can expect in their neighborhoods. So I could be open to some other directions depending on what the rest of council has to say.
Thank you. And if I may, two things. We do have a list of businesses that are allowed under single family homes, and it is pretty expansive. And then also all complaints are anonymous unless it is an animal complaint where it would need to be signed because there's a court involved. So whenever you put in if there's a concern about a neighbor, those are always anonymous. You don't have to feel that that's ever going to be shared. Yep. Ms. Johnson?
Thank you, Mayor. Well, the more that I read about this, actually, the more complicated I think that this is. And one of the things that I was reading when I was reading different cities is that, or one of the best practices is that you have a principal residence for the people that own this, based on voter registration, their automobile registration, their children are registered in school. And so tongue-in-cheek, that's why I was saying that I don't want to take my underwear out every 6 months. Because if this is going to be your primary residence, and then for 120 days, and then the rest of the year you're renting it, it just seems odd to me. So it was meant to be kind of funny, but obviously it didn't come out that way. I apologize. As I was reading through things today also, there were some other considerations that other cities and CML is recommending that we take a look at. Number one is the owner of the property, a natural person. Are there smoke detectors, CO2 detectors, and sprinklers? What about lights and signage? It was mentioned regarding our new motel ordinance that one of the best practices is signage where you have zero tolerance for illegal activity. You know, that's, if we're going to be having these in our neighborhoods, I think we're going to have some consideration regarding some of the guidelines that we've put on motels. There needs to be a 24-hour contact for someone. Off-street parking was highly recommended rather than on-street, and I think you've heard that as well. You know, we are regulating or potential to allow people to stay in homes. With motels and hotels, you certainly have health department and fire department type inspections to make sure that health-wise that this is actually okay regarding bed bugs, that kind of thing. How many persons are you going to allow in that home? Is it based on bedrooms? And should all people that are going to stay in that home be on the application and sign so you know exactly who is in there? What kind of a drug policy will they have? No tolerance? Is pot allowed? What, you know, we are a state that is pro-pot, and how will that work in the residential neighborhoods? Noise was frequently cited in a lot of the CML documentation, and hopefully we'll be reviewing our noise ordinance so that we have decibel meters for our police. Trash was something else that was frequently talked about in some of these places. Also for the motels, you know, one of the best practices is no cash. credit card only kind of a thing. How many of these do we want per block? Do we have a cap for the number of permits? I've got all kinds of questions. How often would we review the permits? And are you going to limit the number of bedrooms? What I can see is that somebody would purchase a home and remodel the basement and put 3 or 4 bedrooms down there. What about liability insurance? It sounds like the standard at this point is $1 million. How many exits? I think that was brought up too about egress. Who's going to enforce snow removal? What about sex offenders? Who's going to vet exactly who's going to be in that home? These are in residential neighborhoods, and we need to know exactly the way that they're going to be vetted. Also, it just came to my mind too, would these be allowed in Salterra? I mean, those are large homes. I think that there might be some pushback there. You know, it's also happened recently that I've learned that the Marriott is going to start having an Airbnb product. And so I'm not sure if that would be on their campuses. So basically, we are going to have homes that would be competing with the hotels. They're going to be expanding. If Marriott does it, probably the Sheraton will, and Motel 6. And again, I have to agree with Councillor Franks, the commercialization of our residential neighborhoods. Once you go down a road legislatively, it is very hard to back out once you've gone in that position. And we've never talked about any kind of fees for violations. I don't know what that would look like. And to be honest with you, I haven't read any number there, but it was brought up. So there's a lot of things that I think we need to be looking at very seriously. I happen to agree with Councillor Bieda. I think we should just, at this time, at any rate, that my preference would be to enforce them. They're not legal. Thank you.
So you would like to prohibit going forward?
Please.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Gutwein?
Thank you, Mayor. Lots of great points made by everybody tonight. So I want to start by saying I also have stayed in many Airbnbs. I love staying in Airbnbs. I think people mentioned the kind of local feel that you get when you get to stay in an Airbnb compared to a hotel. We have had awesome experiences with it. And I think that, you know, one of the questions was why are we discussing this? And I think that to me it's because of innovation, and the world is changing, and we're moving into a shared economy, and we have to be prepared to adapt as a city when there are new products and new ways of using our homes. So I think that we are facing a challenging issue. It's new. A lot of people are concerned about change, and there is a lot worth protecting in Lakewood and in our neighborhoods. So while I do love Airbnbs, and I don't know that I would, I don't know if I would open one myself, although it sounds like if we did, maybe we could bring in some additional income, and that would be nice. I think that we need to move cautiously and really do this in a smart and thoughtful way, because like I said, there's just a lot of character and a lot of things worth protecting in Lakewood. So I think we can find a balance. I think that we have a really great starting point from the ordinance that we had been working on. We've received a lot of good feedback. There's a lot of important issues we need to address, like how much parking, the lighting. One of the questions we had was how do you verify that the principal resident is going to stay there? A number of other issues. So what I would like to see us do, and my colleagues are not going to necessarily like this, but I think there was originally a conversation about having this go to the committee, the housing committee that is now not in existence, but that could be restarted. I'm looking at you, Barb. And the reason why is that this really is an in-depth issue, and I think that it would be useful to have a committee go through the ordinance with a fine-tooth comb. We've done this successfully on other topics, and to really ensure that all the different angles are looked at. And as we do that, the original reason that I wanted to delay this is, we did have a couple of issues about the parking and a few other things, but if I recall correctly, there were some litigation issues in some other cities that had already put in an ordinance, and so there were some things in flux. And then also, they are constantly updating these, and I don't really want to be reinventing the wheel. If we can learn from other cities, I think that would be great. We are leaders on a lot of issues. I don't think we have to be the leader on every single one. I'm okay with that. I would like to see us send it to committee. Let's clear this up. I don't think we should live in a gray area. To put in, an ordinance that is going to work for both our neighbors who don't want to see the character of their neighborhoods change, but also, respect the property rights of those who would like to make additional income, and set a time, as time to monitor, and, try to come back within 6 months so that we're not living in flux. So that is my proposal. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Roybal, you want to weigh in? Then we'll hear from Mr. LeBeer, and Ms. Vincent will close us back down, and we'll...
Okay. Thank you, Mayor. Yep. After talking to a lot of constituents, we had a lot of conversation going back and forth. And one of the huge comments was they looked at it, and Councilor Beta brought this up. Recently here, we moved legislation forward on hotels and motels, and we passed it. The Airbnb is renting out a room or the same thing or similar to a motel or a hotel. And my question is for our city attorney, can you please research and find out if there's any information on what it has, and I think we might be able to have something for the Airbnb and how it applies to the motels. If it's good for the motels, is it good for Airbnb? And we need to make sure and understand that before we move forward on that. And that was one concern that we had. So also is a community, and it's a community impact. And I've heard it very, very delicately from a lot of constituents. When the residents buy into a house, they buy a house. They don't just buy the house itself. They buy the neighborhood. They buy the parks. They buy the schools. They buy the grocery stores. They buy their community and their environment. And when something changes in their community, it kind of disrupts their cohesiveness in their community, good or bad. But it changes, and a lot of people buy into their neighborhood because they love their neighborhood. Like in Ward 3, we have such diverse community, everything from downtown Belmar to a lot of ranching, and then a lot of residential homes. And we do also have commercial. So each particular area really likes the flavor of their Lakewood, and they don't want it changed. And I've heard that very loud and clear. So just wanted to bring those points out. And the other thing that we also, they also brought out is when, and again, it's not necessarily a good thing or a bad thing, but when you have a lot of, folks coming into neighborhoods, puts a little stress on the community itself and a lot of fear into the neighbors. For example, they were saying, well, we don't know who's coming in next door, and we have people coming and going all hours of the night, and we're concerned that maybe they might break in, or something might happen to my dog, or something will occur, something like that, and it's instability. And so those are some of the things that I wanted to bring out with the Airbnb and short-time rentals. So for what it's worth.
So would you like the status quo, prohibit, monitor, go forward?
I would prefer to focus in on enforcement and continue moving forward to, Airbnbs are great, but maybe not for our community here. And I've been told that. So I would say prefer to either monitor or discontinue.
And we'll certainly put on hold. There's been 2 requests of Mr. Graham. One has to do with commercial uses from Ms. Franks, and one is the hotel motel applicability. So we'll hold off on that direction to see where we go forward tonight. Mr. LeBeer?
Thank you. I've said this before, and I'll say it again. I've used Airbnb myself. I've mostly had good experiences with it. I also recently, just last summer, this is a little anecdotal, but last summer I did rent an Airbnb in Santa Monica, which is considered to have the most stringent Airbnb laws, I believe, on the books. And it seems like they did things pretty well. Had a great experience, met some wonderful people. They came and cut some flowers for me and put it in front of our door, which I thought was sweet. I'm also big into using shared technology type, services. I use car share, I use Lime scooters, I do all that stuff. So I'm not shy from trying to engage in this space. I do think this isn't necessarily a one-size-fits-all issue. We talk about property rights and what neighbors expect. Well, maybe certain neighbors don't expect that. Maybe you go to a mixed-use zone and maybe they have different expectations. Maybe they're okay with having a business and residential type experience, and maybe it's more apt for a mixed-use area. I don't know. These are kind of things that I think this is a challenging format to really have this discussion because, there's so many different elements to it. Maybe it works in some places, maybe it doesn't. Maybe, but it's really hard to have a regular conversation about all the different nuances of this type of ordinance in this format. I think it's great hearing everybody's comments and the public feedback that we're getting, and that's what this particular session I think is particularly useful for. But there are a lot of questions. I'm concerned as well. You've heard a lot of other people and what their concerns are. I have concerns about code enforcement. I have concerns about the changing of dynamics and zoning. We have zoning for a reason, so I get that. Parking issues, affordable housing. In some cities, they've had issues with long-term renters being pushed out in place for short-term renting because they make more money with the short-term renters. So that's concerning. We want to make sure people who live here get to stay and live here. We're not changing those dynamics. But I think there's solutions potentially to a lot of these problems, but I think it's going to require some very narrow, focused discussions with our attorneys, with our planning department, with all the different people that, will certainly help guide us and what all the challenges could be, code enforcement, et cetera. So I'm more in a monitor position. I'm happy to learn more and jump in and, see if there are solutions out there for some of these concerns that the neighbors have and et cetera. Also, I would echo what Councilor Goodwine said about this being sort of in a committee format or somewhere where we can have more specific discussions about all these specific issues, which is something I mentioned last meeting before we had this study session. I said we should do a workshop. But anyway, thanks.
Ms. Vincent, bring us home.
Okay, I just thought I'd end it where I started it a couple hours ago, which my position was to monitor it and determine what could go on. However, I don't think we need to have another study session where we just go around and around. And I can't believe I'm going to say this. I really can't, so wait for it. I think we should have a committee look at this and come up with something. I know my co-counselor is going, I can't believe she said it either. But we need something tangible to come back with, and we should have the ability to look at what's worked and what hasn't worked in other places, and then bring back something to the council. If it works, so be it. If it doesn't, then so be it, and we can move forward.
Okay. So we have monitor light, monitor prohibit, monitor kind of, monitor prohibit, monitor housing committee, monitor, and monitor. So I'm going to take a stab here. And there was the suggestion about the housing committee. And so that could be a good utilization of the housing committee. And what could happen is that we could build off of the proposed ordinance, bring in the stakeholders to look at it, and produce a final product to council that has everything included, and we can either adopt it or not. I do agree. We could study this issue every Monday night for the next 5 years. I think at some point you got to be willing just to say this is what we want in our community and this is what we don't. We do have good feedback that some folks who have had bad experiences are saying, hey, may not be the worst thing, but let's try to put some guardrails. So why don't we see if we can do that? Utilize the housing committee. We could set, I don't know what the date, time period is. I'll refer to our housing committee. And then in the meantime, there was one concerning thing. I know that there's an issue around enforcement, but sans doing a ban that would then engage more enforcement, we can't pick and choose, right? We don't have that ability. We could potentially go and do more education around it and maybe bring an awareness and let people know, hey, we're studying this, just so you know you're doing this illegally. Please come be a part of the conversation. So, Ms. Franks.
All right, so let me give you a lay down where we're at. So I think we're close on the ordinance for the Housing Commission. I got some late breaking information on one of the sections that had been added. I think I can get enough clarity around that to bring it to council. Doesn't mean, we could modify that. So I think I can fast track that piece, get it back, and have something come forward. And then I'll point out the section that was added and what the concerns are. And then council can just be ready to have an amendment if they choose. So I think we can get that based on scheduling of when the city manager can bring that forward, but I can commit to making, by the end of the week, being done with the piece going back. So then they can calendar that. I had said in the last study session that I thought this might be where it was best positioned because it's really going to involve breaking it up into pieces and parts, getting a lot of homework, coming back and then working through that, and then possibly for each section coming with an a la carte list and saying, here's the 3 distinctly different options and whittling it down. I don't know that that's ultimately going to make it to something that passes. I don't know if we'll be able to come up with something that is palatable. I want to set that expectation. This could be an awful lot of work, and I think that's our job. We're here to do that. But just keep in mind, we may end up with something that we still don't put forth. Then that means we have to clarify what we currently have in order to shore that up. We can't just leave that undone. If we decide that we're not going to go forward, then we have to then have the other research done to say, well, what does the other side look like? That way we have something concrete to bring that direction. So if thing A fails at the dais, then we immediately then talk about B, because we have to give the community that assurance, and we can't. So I would say it'd have to be 2-pronged. And I think that while I'm not looking for more work, I think it makes sense to go to the Housing Commission, and I think it's a good exercise for us.
So to that, I think you bring up a good point, and the committee could actually look at both and would need to present both that way if not. But the hope would be that we could have enough stakeholders to get to a point where something could move forward. And you're right, at the end of the day, it may not. But the more inclusive of the group, I mean, listen, we've heard from some really reasonable folks that have been engaged, and we've got some great recommendations from a longstanding community group here tonight too. So I think there's a lot that we can do. I think we need to be clear too. Our starting point is what was proposed. I think that's what we start to build off of, so that there's some idea, and then that would come into play, when questions would arise about the hotel motel, about the commercial. We would have that opportunity, much like the development dialogue with experts. So, Mr. Abel.
I like the idea of going to the committee, and I would encourage everyone to be on our website. We list the ad hoc committee meeting dates as well. You go to the government tab on the front page. It's a long way to get there. Go to the government tab on front page, click on city council, click on past and future meetings. Future meetings will give you the meetings that we're going to have from the dais here, as well as our ad hoc committee meetings. Please attend those ad hoc meetings. We've had a great representation from the community on our development dialogue committee. A lot of our recommendations that came out of that committee came from the folks the community members who came to talk to us. So please be part of those committee meetings. Hopefully there will be public comment taken at those. So I would say let's go for the committee meeting and do a large community outreach effort. Thank you.
Thank you. And potentially there's an opportunity to weigh in online, or no, Ms. Hodson, is that, I know Mr. Skilling said that we don't have that ability on development dialogue, but is this something that could be part of Lakewood Speaks? Or we can check into it, but
we can really try to expand the opportunities for people to give us their input.
Great. Thank you. Ms. Franks.
I needed to ask a clarifying question. I wasn't sure what you meant by our starting point. We obviously back in February had the ordinance that was proposed that many of us thought that there was a lot of missing pieces. So I'm trying to understand, what do you see as our basis? Because I see it being all that we've done. We just need to organize it, organize it, break it up. And I don't think we need to have a template. I think we've been given enough information where we can then, our first meeting would be to build the template of all the topics and then cut it up into pieces and parts. That way the community knows these topics will be addressed this meeting, the next. I guess we need a planning meeting first. I don't think I can just start.
No.
I just wanted to understand where you thought we might want to go.
Yeah, certainly. I know there's been a lot of pre-work done to give us a baseline to kind of start from and to go from there, in encapsulating everything that we have, but that can be a kind of our bare bones to then begin. And for the folks that aren't aware, the Housing Committee consists of Mr. Roybal, Mr. Paul, Ms. Vincent, Ms. Johnson, Ms. Franks, and Ms. Harrison. So that is our housing committee. Not officially, but it will be officially one day. Are we good on that? Is that clear direction that I have? Yes? Yes. I want to make sure. Okay. All right. Ms. Hodson, do you need any clarification from that? We're kind of trying to take it off your plate and put it on ours.
Thank you, and that does make sense. And I'm happy. We'll get the ordinance for the creation of the commission on the agenda as soon as we can, so we can move forward with the committee work. And that will be an ordinance, so it'll be first and second reading. And then if we can be helpful at all to help break that down in terms of how to approach the particular topic, so that people can attend where they are the most interested, we're happy to help do that.
Great. All right. Thank you very much. And we'll go to council reports. Mr.
No report.
Ms. Gutwein? I don't.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Sorry about that. Okay, thank you. We had a great ward meeting on Saturday. We had large group of people with a forum debate, or a forum on the special election that we will have this July 2nd. I really appreciate everybody who came, and especially our moderator and all of our forum participants. Everyone was really respectful during this, what can be a very controversial and an emotional issue. So I hope that people left feeling somewhat more informed. And we did share information of how to get more input on the group that is for and the group that is against. It's all on the city website. I would like to just encourage everybody to vote. It is going to have a lot of implications for our city. Thank you.
Mr. Skilling?
So we're going to have the same type event at our ward meeting this Saturday, 9:30 to 11. We will have two speakers, one on the for side, one on the against side, give a presentation in a forum setting, and that is in our usual spot at Green Mountain Presbyterian at 9:30 to 11. And again, that is the Strategic Growth Initiative Forum. Normally we say that we'll have time to have other topics come up. I can assure you that that is not going to be the case, and it is going to be growth initiative for the entire time.
Beer?
So we're having our ward meeting Wednesday, 6 to 7:30 p.m. on Wednesday, May 8th, and that's going to be at the 40 West Arts District, 1560 Teller Street. Just want to remind everybody about that because it is a different time than we've historically done, but we're making some changes. So look forward to seeing everyone there. Thanks.
Mr. Abel?
At the risk of being repetitive, we also, for Ward 1, will have on the first Saturday of June, we'll have a meeting that focuses on the Strategic Growth Initiative. We'll have a speaker for and a speaker against, and we hope you all come out to enjoy that conversation.
Ms. Harrison?
Already said, thank you.
Ms. Franks? Ms. Johnson? Mr. Beda?
No report.
Ms. Vincent?
I just want to piggyback on what my co-counselor said. What we'll be talking about, we'll have an open forum, but I also want to let people know that there is, I'm calling it an entry treatment. There's going to be a plan for Colfax and Wadsworth, park-like atmosphere where there's now dirt. So people may be interested in that. And I just want to be sure to offer everybody this opportunity. I think the Colfax Marathon is in its 10th year? 10th?
Might be longer than that.
Probably. Okay. Well, every single year, I have participated in the opportunity to clean up Colfax before the marathon, or as we like to refer to it, an archaeological dig. Things come up every year. So if you would like to participate, it's taking less time these days, but it starts at 7:30 in the morning, meet in front of the old Denver Drumstick, the old bingo parlor, and Maddie Nichols will give you a bag and a pickup stick and send you on your way. So it does take less time, and we're not to be outdone because in June we will be discussing the special district election.
What Saturday is the cleanup?
It's this Saturday for the cleanup. So thank you. The May 11th, 7:30 a.m. because the marathon is coming, which has been rated one of the top 10 marathons by Runner Magazine. So thought I'd tell you that.
Great, thank you. And if you've never had the opportunity to go pick up trash on West Colfax, let me tell you, it'll give you a new insight into all that goes on in our city, and some of the things you'll see you wish you'll never would have wanted to see in your life, and you may meet some funny characters along the way. So it's always a great event, and we'll see how that goes. I actually do not have a report, so Ms. Greer, anything? Mr. Graham, Ms. Hodson? Okay, so with that, I want to, again, thank everybody for coming out. I apologize for the delayed start. Thank you to our police agents who always keep us safe. We'll adjourn at 9:33.